Hello listeners, and welcome to the Montel Weekly Podcast, where we bring you the latest news, issues and changes happening in the energy sector. A perennial complaint amongst some market participants has been that not enough capacity has been made available due to security of supply concerns. But last month, a new calculation method for cross-zonal capacity was introduced to improve Nordic grid utilisation. The system is called flow-based market coupling. Some of you listeners may be familiar with it, but some may not. It has received some criticism from lobby groups and smaller firms in the Nordic region. In this episode, we're going to try and explain this quite techie system, how it works in practice, what it's meant to do, and what have been some of the concerns so far. To help me unpack this, I'm pleased to be joined by Frank Boerman, process specialist at TSO TenneT in the Netherlands. A warm welcome to you, Frank.
Thank you. Hello, Richard.
Great to have you back. Our Nordic editor, Olav Vilnes.
Thank you, Richard.
Great to have you back as well. And our Nordic market expert, Priyanka Shinde. Welcome to the Montel podcast, Priyanka.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
I'd like to start with you, Frank. Could you explain for those who don't know what flow-based market coupling is exactly? And if you can try and put it into layman's terms, because it is a bit complex.
It is, but how I usually like to explain it in the most simple fashion is that in the system we had before flow-based, we simply had a capacity number per border per direction. So, for example, 500 megawatts released capacity from the Netherlands to Germany, and then another, let's say, 600 from the Netherlands to Belgium. Now, obviously, if you, as a TSO, want to calculate the capacity that is available on the borders, and you look at many scenarios, in the end, you look at the lowest number, the most conservative take, to be able to say that you're safe in all situations. But that is, in practice, not always needed, because if there is a large export from Netherlands to Germany, it is very possible that there is a large import possible from Belgium to the Netherlands, etc. So in other terms, borders are not in isolation. The grid is all connected, and that is what flow-based calculates. So flow-based calculates in such a way that it takes into account these dependencies, and that it, in the end, gives you a capacity, a matrix of constraints, so a set of possibilities of capacities, and then within which the market can move, taking into account the dependencies of net positions of various zones.
And why was it introduced?
It was introduced because the European system was looking for more efficient ways to use the grid, specifically because of what I just sketched, right? So that an ATC, as we call it, system is too conservative. And then, there was for various trials and attempts. And in the end, we went with this, which was actually developed in Western Europe among French, Belgium, German, and Austrian and Dutch TSOs. And there we tried it out in 2015, and that worked pretty well. And then we expanded to a larger region to do most of continental Europe. And now recently the Nordics have switched as well.
Yeah, I mean, what are the benefits compared to the system that was in place before? I know, and maybe you could explain also what ATC is, Frank?
Yeah, so ATC stands for available transfer capacity. So that's the simple number that I was talking about. And the benefit is actually quite easily summarized. You can release more capacity to the market, not in a linear fashion per border, but as a set of possibilities.
And it's been running on the continent for many, many years. I mean, almost 10 years then, Frank. And then were there kind of hiccups initially, or, can you see some of the concerns that emerged in the Nordic market at the moment that they existed before on the continent?
Yes. Yeah. So obviously this is a little bit before my time. I've been in the industry for a little over 4 years now. But I did see the go-live of core, and the same concerns were raised, maybe in a different way. But in the end, it always boils down to the fact that a flow-based system is much more difficult to forecast than an ATC system by nature, because you give this set of possibilities. It's not a simple number per border anymore. So it's simply a more complicated system. But on the other hand, I would also like to state it's not rocket science, right? So anybody with a rudimentary knowledge of linear algebra can understand what a constraint matrix is. And And so it is more difficult than the previous systems, but it brings a lot more social welfare because it delivers more capacity. And it is definitely, once you do some studying, or as I said during the Montel Energy Day, you have to do your homework, then it's doable to forecast, as many also smaller plays prove every single day on the continent.
I mean, that's useful to have that background there. But why did the Nordics introduce it so late, Olav?
I think the intention initially was to introduce it already back in 2016. But then there were a lot of IT problems. They had to develop new system. They had to coordinate the systems they already had. So I think there was almost a habit every year to write about a new delay for any news desk like Montel, because there was always news coming out that it was delayed. IT problems, sometimes difficult to understand what these IT problems consisted of, but at least that was the main explanation given.
And what's been the reaction so far?
I think this is of course not something that often reaches the main news in the evenings, but there have been quite some big reactions in Sweden, because you have seen higher prices in the south of Sweden, which has even created quite a lot of criticism from the industry there, from some politicians as well. Even the Social Democrat Party in Sweden have actually called for a halt to this launch of market coupling, just to investigate the potential consequences further. So that's quite surprising, actually, that you have such strong, even political reactions on a very technical system.
Okay. So it has had some political reverberations and has created some shockwaves there, even though it's quite technical. And is that because of the price differentials then?
It's probably because of the price differentials. There was some news coming out today from the TSO in Sweden, which said that flows had increased by 30% across the country after flow-based was introduced, compared to the 20 days before it was introduced. I think that figure shows that it has benefits for the flows. More power is flowing from the north to south. But in the meantime, there are, of course, issues connected to counterintuitive flows. You have some bidding zones that have low prices that actually get imports, which is difficult to understand from the perspective that you had before this system was introduced. It also then, as Frank said, makes it more difficult to predict day-ahead prices for market participants. So you have had complaints also from power producers, for example, who find it harder to manage their production because they don't really know the price and they are surprised by the outcome. But that is probably a learning process that they need to get used to and align their adjust their models. Absolutely.
I'd like to put those issues to Frank as well. But first, Priyanka, you're based in Sweden. What's your take on the experience so far of flow-based market coupling?
In my opinion, I think flow-based market coupling, in terms of the go live, has delivered according to what we were contemplating about it, because the system operators have been running some parallel runs for about 1.5 years. So we kind of had some indications of this. There were several discussions, there were regular stakeholder meetings that were organized, and I have actually participated in some of those. So I was kind of aware of what was coming, and to see that coming in live in reality is something I must say that it has kind of been in line in terms of more capacities being availed, and also more flows being facilitated in a socially optimal way, where cheaper resources are being sent to the expensive price zones and so on. So this is happening. We do see that there are kind of market decisions which already include certain overloading effects of power lines or network elements, which otherwise the system operators would have to actually tackle in terms of expensive remedial actions at the real time. So they are already taken into account in the day ahead stage in the market clearing. So it's kind of also facilitating that kind of bringing closer, I think, the markets to the physics of the system. I think this is one of the biggest takeaways of what the flow-based has delivered in Nordics. And definitely, I mean, this brings us to other questions of counterintuitive flows and so on. But that's like a kind of part and parcel of flow-based market coupling.
So what is a counterintuitive? I know you prefer the term a non-intuitive flow there, Priyanka, but what is that? So that's basically, the intuitive way is that power would flow from a low price zone to a higher price. And but what's a counter? That would be the reverse,
opposite.
Then.
Yeah, exactly. And I think the concept itself is quite difficult to understand, so we can keep it to a simpler word by by saying non-intuitive flows. But yeah, it's actually also something that makes us think in a different way, because so far in the Nordics, since we have had the older method, which is ATC, which had always the normal direction, the simpler one. But now it's a new way of thinking that we have to get used to, because what happens is that the flows can be directed from higher price zones to the lower ones. So one example I can quote is from Sweden. So from SE1, which was actually higher priced. SE1 is the northern region of Sweden, towards the central part, which is SE2. So we were seeing flows in SE2, which was actually lower priced. But what was happening is eventually these flows were also, some of these were directed towards SE3, which is southern part towards Stockholm, which is actually really a consumption hub. So we are kind of seeing these kind of patterns. So it might seem that from SE1 to SE2, it's actually counterintuitive or non-intuitive, but eventually they are also being directed elsewhere. So this is one kind of way to release more flows, capacity, such that they bring overall better social welfare for the overall power system. And the second thing that actually we have been observing sometimes is the interaction with Norway and Sweden. So NO3, which is the central part of Norway, I would say. So that was kind of even having negative prices some days, but it was actually importing from Sweden. So one would say, why was that happening? And actually that was to avoid some overloads in certain power lines in Sweden. So these kind of flows can be facilitated to avoid expensive remedial action. So it's like a stitch in time saves 9.
So it's better for the system as a whole, even though there may be some kind of irregularities in the way that the prices are formed, if that's maybe a very simplistic way of putting it. But Frank, what's your view on this? These concerns have emerged from some Nordic players, and especially the reaction to counterintuitive or non-intuitive flows.
Well, in line with what the previous speaker said, both of them, is that the Nordic TSOs have run a parallel run for a long time. So anybody who is truly surprised by this result simply has not been paying attention over the last year and a half. And I think that's important to stress, because a lot of parties seem to be telling the public, like, we're completely caught out, but that just means that you haven't been paying attention. In terms of non-intuitive flows, there are a couple of points important to remember. First of all, is that a lot of people look at commercial scheduled exchanges, but commercial scheduled exchanges are not real. They are something that is calculated by Euphemia after the fact. And Nordic flow-based actually has...
What is Euphemia? Can you just explain that as well?
Oh, sorry. That's the market coupling algorithm. So the thing that puts it all together for the whole of Europe. And Nordic flow-based actually allows you to see the actual forecasted physical flows on the borders, which are much more in line with physical flows. Then indeed you can still see non-intuitive flows, but sometimes you see them differently. But it is an important, non-intuitive flows is an important part of making the optimization work, right? So it's important to remember that the market coupling is based on a regional optimization. So that means it finds the optimal point for the whole market region, as I always like to say, from the north of Norway to the south of Italy. And if you constrain that to only allow it to cross borders from low to high prices, then you can end up in a point which is not the global optimum. And that's why it's very important that in as much areas as possible, non-intuitive flows are possible, because it enables, in the end, more welfare for both consumers and producers in the whole region combined. But that's really a zoomed out view that you need to have in European integration and European market coupling. And unfortunately, not everybody sees that. So sometimes people zoom very much in on their area. But that is, of course, not the whole picture.
When it comes to forecasting both flows and prices, what are the challenges here under the new system?
Well, partly, if you only have to forecast a single number per border, that's obviously much easier than to forecast a whole set of possibilities. But I have seen in the past by multiple companies that you can do even simpler forms of time series forecasting on the PTDF matrix and still get quite a decent forecast to be able to see what the market direction is combined with a fundamental analysis. The problem in the Nordic is obviously Svenska Kraftnät. So Svenska kraftnät anonymizes its connects to be in line with Swedish national security laws, which are kind of unique, I can say, in Europe, at least for their impact on my sector. And that makes it a bit hard because then you cannot see what connects are doing constraints are doing from day to day because they're anonymized. So you cannot compare them from day to day. There are ways to de-anonymize them, and more analysts are trying to do that. But that's obviously quite an effort. And that hurts market transparency. So I know that there's a lot of discussion about that. But so far, there's no resolution on that. So that makes the Nordics a bit more difficult than the continent. Because in the continent, we do not have anonymized connects. Everything is transparent.
So it's not just about having the right models, although that's certainly a part of it, I'm sure, but it's also about the level of information that's made available. But I know you represent TenneT, which is the Dutch and German TSO, but not Svenska kraftnät. But could you highlight some of the issues here around transparency? What are some of the concerns that a TSO would have in making that kind of available making that data available?
As far as I understood it, in Sweden, the rule is simply that a lot of things are named national security, including, for example, stuff like the physical location of substations and power lines, because they're afraid of attacks on them or manipulations. However, this is a form of security by obscurity, which almost never works when you're talking about such large objects or systems. And that's why basically the rest of Europe, the entirety of the rest of Europe, has given up on this. It's also good to remember that it's in some ways a paper reality, because there are quite good open source maps out there from hobbyists who just cycle around Sweden and make pictures of high voltage lines. So it's not like the information isn't there. However, the legal reality is there. So as long as the law is there, then Svenska kraftnät obviously has to comply with that. I don't think you can fault them for that. I think it's more like a political question of how they want to tackle this. Is it maybe necessary to make an exception for this? I don't know. That's a question for the Swedish politicians and regulators. But from a technical perspective, it is absolutely true that it makes hard to forecast something if some of the data is anonymized. And another problem in the Nordics is small zones. That also makes it harder to forecast, of course. But that's something that we have less in Europe, on the continent.
Absolutely. I think that reflects some of the concerns there amongst the Nordic market participants. But and we've seen also the Swedes are very sensitive to these kind of security concerns with their recent decision on offshore wind that we also have covered in a previous podcast. So I think they've scrapped the plans of up to 32 gigawatts, citing security concerns and defence issues. But Olav, if I can turn to you, there's also been some comments that the system, the algorithm, whatever you like to call it, the flow-based market coupling, favours larger companies who have resources to invest in these kind of models that are required. Is that a fair sort of assumption? Do you think a fair concern?
Maybe that's just it's a general thing. Maybe if things get very complicated, it's good to have many resources to develop complicated models. But there have been a concern. Most recently, there was a conference by regulators in Finland where some market participants highlighted this concern that it would favor the big ones like Statkraft, Fortum, Vattenfall, the people with most information, the companies with most information. But I've even seen Statkraft, the CEO of Statkraft, was also out here calling for more transparency when speaking at I think she was presenting their annual results or whatever it was, saying that the TSOs should provide more information on these critical lines, as Frank talked about already, to get more information. Where are the constraints in the system, so they can better understand it. So I think it is a concern also for the big players, not only for the small ones. But of course, I think the small ones think at least they have more resources to develop new models.
That's true. I mean, and Priyanka, you sit in Sweden. Is this something that is discussed amongst your contacts in your network? And do you expect any kind of movement to be made on making this kind of information public or more transparent?
Well, I'm sure there will be some I mean, hopefully there will be something done about it, because what we always see in markets is that we learn the best practices from each other, from different markets. And as Frank already mentioned, in Central Europe, there has been flow-based functioning very well, very transparently. So one really sees the benefit of this. And based on this, I think we can really learn also in other parts and see the benefits it brings over giving away a little bit of security. Because if we look at Sweden in general, a lot of data, even about the personal data that can be public, so you can find somebody's address or tax information or such things pretty much openly. So it's quite okay to, I think, avail a bit more information in terms of bringing more transparency. But however, I must already mention that flow-based also brings more transparency to the market participants in general as compared to the old ATC method. And when it comes to talking about like the forecasting methodology, I feel that it really brings everyone to the same level, as Olav mentioned, in terms of big players and small players. So it's like a kind of similar level of transparency. But what might happen is that, it might be that, with more data coming in, there will be more machine learning techniques. So the market participants will figure it out one way or the other. So even if the system operator wants to release the information or not, but yes, it might favor someone over the other. So it maybe brings more information asymmetry. So let's not defeat the purpose of having flow-based in the first place. We're trying to bring more transparency, but let's not take it away by not availing data. So that would be something to do.
I think that's a good point. I mean, it's always, even when it's hampered like this, it is still already much more transparent than what was before. And I think that's indeed good to stress that, regardless of it not being perfect, it is definitely a step forward, not backwards, to do this.
I think that's an important point. And Priyanka, do you expect there to be, more instances of these non-intuitive flows, and where prices kind of mismatch compared to what the market expects?
Well, that's a bit tough to say already now, but we do see even in the forward market there are some movements compared to the EPADs, which are the price area differentials and so on. So we are seeing some movements there which kind of reflect the kind of impression of what the traders think how the market will be solved in the coming months or coming quarters. So we are seeing some movements there. For example, SE3, which is South Sweden, like Stockholm and so on. So it's being cleared at a higher price and so on than before. And so on. So we do see some movements, but it's a bit tough to say if, how exactly will be the price formation. I think one important thing is that it will definitely also include the fundamentals. So this month has been quite special of November, where in the beginning there was, let's say, quite lack of wind in continental Europe and also in Nordics. But then there have been weeks with maybe more wind and less wind. So it's been switching off on and off quite a lot. So the price data that we've collected so far is quite special. So it will only time will tell. But yes, what we are seeing, at least one maybe factor I can mention is that better price coupling, which has been enabled due to flow-based, is already helping Finland, for example, which was actually quite sensitive to the base load. But this month there has been some nuclear outages, and the spot prices in Finland hasn't reacted as significantly as in the past months because of better coupling with the rest of Nordics and so on. So there are also already some examples of better price coupling. And when it comes to counterintuitive flows, I think that it's part and parcel of flow-based. So it's maybe something that will stay with us, and we will figure out more about it with more data and more tools.
But that's very interesting with Finland, because that represent, what you're saying there is that's an example of how it's evened out, or it's become sort of systematically important for the prices, not just for one price zone. But what would your message be, Frank, to the Nordic market participants who are still, concerned, and even to some of the politicians who have voiced, these kind of concerns about, or these worries about this new system for them? Not new on the continent, obviously.
Well, I think it goes back to what I just said, right? That it's not perfect, but it's definitely a step forward. It is a major milestone in further market integration, and I would really stress that people zoom out, for politicians to zoom out and see the bigger picture. It's not only about low prices in certain zones. It is about the social welfare for everyone involved, producers and consumers in the whole region. And for market parties, it is. I always say it's just important to sit down and study, to study what we're doing in core, to see what is available out there. There are many analytical companies which can help with that. And yes, it is not easy. It is not, just a flick of a switch. But it's not rocket science either. It's definitely possible to do these things. You just need to invest a little bit more. And once you are part of the club that actually understands it, that is a big advantage. Because the energy world is not that big. And once you know this, once you understand what flow-based is, that can be a competitive advantage. And it will also perhaps help you to expand to the core region. So that there are really advantages there. You just need to make the investment.
That's very clear. That's a very clear message there. Thank you for that, Frank. And when you say the core region, what does that consist of for those who are not aware of that?
These days, let me think. The core region. So it's the Benelux, so Netherlands, Belgium, France, Germany, Austria. That was the original club, and then we expanded also to Poland, Slovenia, Slovakia, Romania, Hungary, Croatia. I really hope I don't forget one now. Czech Republic. I think I got them all then now. And soon we will, well, in TSO terms soon, but in some years we will expand. So legally Ireland has already joined, but they don't have a physical link yet. That will come in, a couple of years, I think 1 to 2 years. And then Ireland will also be included in the flow-based region. And Italy North will also join in a couple of years.
So that's the plan going forward. But Olav, what are your expectations in the Nordics? Do you think the noises will die down as people get used to it once they kind of have their models in place and become accustomed to the flow-based system?
Definitely, it's, yeah, clearly. This is just, it's always a new system. There are some teething problems in the beginning. You don't know how much is down to fundamentals, how much is down to the new system. It takes some time to develop the models. I remember, I'm old enough to remember what happened in the continental Europe when it came in 2015, and it was also a lot of complaints about this black box that was difficult to predict. And now you don't hear much about that anymore. Maybe more complicated with the bidding zones in Nordic region, as mentioned. But I think they will adjust, and they have no option to adjust. I think going back to the old system is probably not any option anyway now. So yeah.
I mean, it's a brave new world, and we have to face it. I mean, with all the complexities and difficulties that brings with it. But I'd like to thank you very much, Frank and Priyanka and Olav, for being on the Montel Weekly podcast. A fascinating discussion. It's very technical, but you made it, at least for this simple head, very easy to understand. So thank you very much for that. Yeah.
You're welcome.